Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk was rewind like Aries. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, to a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, was a symphony of brilliant, simple truths. The sky was blue. All Might was the greatest hero. And Kaken was the coolest person he had ever known. This particular truth felt especially potent on a sweltering midsummer afternoon, under the lazy drone of cicadas that filled the air with a constant, electric hum. The heat shimmered above the asphalt of their quiet suburban street, but down by the neighborhood creek, a canopy of broadleaf trees provided a cool, dappled sanctuary. This was their kingdom, a stretch of shallow, gurgling water and moss-slick stones that was, in their minds, as vast and mysterious as any untamed wilderness. "Hurry up, Deku!" Katsuki Bakugo's voice, sharp and confident even at 4 years old, cut through the gentle sounds of the creek. He stood perched on a large, flat rock in the middle of the stream, his small chest puffed out and his hands on his hips. His crimson eyes, gleaming with mischief and an innate, fiery intensity, were fixed on Izuku, who was carefully navigating the slippery stones at the water's edge. "I'm coming, Kaken!" Izuku called back, his own voice a soft, eager chirp. He wobbled on a stone, his oversized red sneakers slipping slightly. His wild mop of green-black hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his face, dusted with a constellation of freckles, was a portrait of pure, unadulterated adoration. In his hands he clutched their most prized possessions, a limited-edition Silver Age All Might action figure, and a slightly battered villain figurine they had designated as Toxic Sludge Monster. "You're too slow!" Katsuki laughed, a sound like popping firecrackers. "The villain is getting away!" "All Might doesn't wait!" To punctuate his point, he held up his hands, and tiny, harmless explosions sparked from his palms. A smell like burnt sugar and ozone briefly perfumed the air. Izuku's eyes widened with the familiar awe. Katsuki's quirk, explosion, had manifested a few months ago. It was flashy, powerful, and undeniably heroic. All the other kids in their preschool class thought so, but none with the same zealous reverence as Izuku. While Izuku's own quirk had yet to make an appearance, it didn't matter. Living vicariously through Kaken's brilliance was more than enough. "Wow, Kaken!" Izuku breathed, finally making it to the rock opposite his friend. "You'll be a hero just like All Might, better than All Might," Katsuki declared, snatching the villain figure from Izuku's hand. He set it down on his rock, the hero's stronghold. "I'll be the #1 hero, and you can be my sidekick. You can carry my stuff." "Okay," Izuku agreed without a hint of disappointment. To even be in the orbit of someone as destined for greatness as Kaken was a privilege. Their game began in earnest. Katsuki, playing All Might, would leap from rock to rock, his movements surprisingly agile for a child his age, narrating his every heroic move in a loud, boisterous voice. Izuku, playing the grateful civilian, would gasp and cheer from the sidelines, occasionally moving the villain to a new spot to prolong the adventure. "Take this, villain!" "Texas!" "Smash!" Katsuki yelled, bringing the All Might figure down in a mighty arc. He misjudged his own enthusiastic movement. His foot, planted too close to the mossy edge of the rock, slid out from under him. Time seemed to slow down for a terrifying half-second. Izuku saw Katsuki's triumphant grin morph into a mask of surprise, then fear. He flailed, his arms pinwheeling as he tumbled backward off the rock. There was a sickening, wet crack, followed by a sharp, agonized scream that was nothing like his usual boisterous shouts. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He scrambled across the remaining stones, his own safety completely forgotten. Katsuki was half in the water, propped up on one arm, his face pale and twisted in pain. His other arm. Izuku's breath hitched. A jagged, dark rock, jutting from the creek bed like a shark's tooth, was slick with a horrifying, bright red. Katsuki's forearm was laid open, a deep, gruesome gash that wept blood at an alarming rate. The crimson flow mixed with the clear creek water, swirling away in lazy, pink clouds. Through the deluge of blood, Izuku could see the shocking white of bone. Katsuki wasn't just crying, he was sobbing, a raw, terrified sound that ripped through Izuku's world and tore it to shreds. The invincible Kaken, the future #1 hero, was hurt. Badly, and it was all Izuku could do not to be sick. "Kaken!" he cried, his voice trembling. He splashed into the water, the cold soaking his shorts and sneakers. He knelt beside his friend, his mind a frantic, buzzing panic. "Help! I have to help him. Get an adult. Mom. Auntie Mitsuki. All Might." All Might would know what to do, but there were no adults. There was no All Might. There was only Izuku, and his friend, who was bleeding and crying and looking smaller and more fragile than Izuku had ever seen him. "It hurts, Deku," Katsuki whimpered, cradling his injured arm. "It hurts so much." That was it. The dam of Izuku's panic broke, and a tidal wave of pure, desperate empathy flooded him. The need to make the pain stop was an overwhelming, physical force. It was more than a thought, it was an instinct. He reached out, his small hands trembling, and did the only thing he could think of. He touched him. He wrapped his hands around Katsuki's wounded forearm, his thumbs pressing gently on either side of the gash. "It's okay," he whispered, tears streaming down his own face, mingling with the sweat and grime. "I'll make it better. I'll make it okay." The moment his skin made contact, something shifted. A strange tingle started on his forehead, right at his hairline, a tiny, unfamiliar pressure point. It was followed by a wave of warmth that spread down his neck, through his shoulders, and into his arms. The world seemed to go slightly fuzzy at the edges, the drone of the cicadas replaced by a high-pitched, resonant hum that vibrated deep inside his skull. A light, soft and green like new spring leaves, bloomed from his palms. It wasn't like Katsuki's explosions, hot and violent. This was a cool, steady light, and it sank into Katsuki's arm like water into dry soil. Izuku stared, mesmerized and terrified, as the impossible happened. It was like watching a film run in reverse. The torrent of blood slowed, then stopped. Then, impossibly, it began to flow backward, retreating into the wound as if summoned. The gaping lips of the gash quivered and began to knit themselves together. Severed muscle fibers reconnected, torn skin weaved itself whole, and the pale white of the bone vanished beneath a rapidly regenerating layer of flesh. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. When the light faded, Izuku pulled his hands back as if burned. He stared. Katsuki stared. The arm was perfect. There was no cut, no blood, no scar. Not even a faint pink line. The skin was smooth and unblemished, completely clean, as if the injury had never happened. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Katsuki's ragged sobs had ceased. He lifted his arm, turning it over and over in the dappled sunlight, his red eyes wide with disbelief. The pain was gone. You did that?" Katsuki whispered, his voice hoarse. He looked at Izuku, his expression unreadable. Izuku could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. A giddy, dizzying relief washed over him. He did it. He had a quirk. He wasn't just a Deku. He had a quirk, and he had saved Kaken. He had healed him. He was a hero. But then Katsuki's expression curdled. The awe in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. Something cold and unnerving. "My arm," Katsuki said, his voice flat. "It feels weird." He held his healed arm up next to his uninjured one. Izuku leaned in, his brief moment of triumph evaporating into a puddle of confusion. He saw it too. The healed arm was different. The skin was impossibly smooth, lacking the usual scrapes and sun-kissed tone of a 4-year-old boy who spent his life outdoors. It was paler, softer. Like a baby's. And it was smaller. It was a subtle difference, one you wouldn't notice at a glance, but side by side it was undeniable. His right forearm was slightly shorter, the wrist a fraction thinner, the muscles less defined. It was as if Izuku hadn't just rewound the injury, but had rewound the arm itself, peeling back a year or two of its growth. The creeping horror was a physical sensation, like ice water being poured down Izuku's spine. He hadn't just fixed it. He had changed it. He had broken it in a new, more terrifying way. Katsuki's breath hitched. He stared at his subtly mismatched arms, his lower lip beginning to tremble. This wasn't the triumphant relief of being saved. This was the deep, primal terror of being fundamentally altered by an unknown force. He looked from his strange, doll-like arm back to Izuku. He looked at Izuku's hands, the hands that had glowed with that sickly green light. "What did you do to me?" Katsuki's voice was a choked whisper, laced with a fear Izuku had never heard from him before. I was helping," Izuku stammered, his own fear rising to meet his friend's. "I made it better." "No! You made it weird!" Katsuki scrambled backward, away from Izuku, splashing frantically through the water. "You're weird!" He got to his feet on the opposite bank, cradling his changed arm as if it were a foreign object grafted onto his body. The look in his eyes was one of utter betrayal and revulsion. "Get away from me!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You're a freak! A monster!" With a final, terrified sob, Katsuki turned and ran, disappearing into the trees, leaving Izuku alone in the creek. The abandoned All Might figure lay face down in the water, a forgotten hero in a failed rescue. Izuku stood frozen, the cold of the water seeping into his bones. The words echoed in the sudden quiet of the creek bed. "Freak. Monster." He slowly lifted his hands, turning them over. They looked like normal hands. The hands of a 4-year-old boy. But they weren't. They were the hands that had warped his best friend. He wanted to be a hero who saved people. But his very first act of saving had only caused a different kind of pain. A deeper kind. He had a quirk, but it wasn't a gift. It was a curse. A quirk that takes away. The walk home was a silent, miserable trek. Katsuki had run so far ahead that Izuku was left to trudge back alone, his waterlogged sneakers squelching with every heavy step. He didn't notice the beauty of the afternoon anymore. The world had been muted, its colors leached away by the cold dread coiling in his stomach. He kept his hands balled into tight fists, hidden in the pockets of his shorts, as if they might lash out of their own accord. When he finally reached his apartment complex, he saw Katsuki standing with his mother, the fiery Auntie Mitsuki, outside their door. Katsuki wasn't speaking, just staring at the ground, his smaller arm held stiffly at his side. Izuku watched as Auntie Mitsuki knelt, her sharp features softened with a confusion that mirrored his own. She was examining the arm, her brow furrowed. She looked up and her eyes met Izuku's from across the courtyard. He flinched and hurried inside his own apartment, the click of the lock sounding like a prison door shutting behind him. "Izuku? You're back! And you're soaked!" Inko Midoriya's voice was warm and gentle, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. She bustled out of the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands. "What happened? Did you fall in the creek again? Where's Katsuki?" Izuku couldn't form the words. He just stood there, dripping on the jenkin, his shoulders slumped. A single, fat tear rolled down his cheek. Inko's cheerful demeanor melted away instantly, replaced by maternal concern. "Honey? What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She knelt in front of him, her soft hands checking his arms and face for injuries. "Keikaken got hurt," he finally managed to whisper. "He fell. There was so much blood." "Oh my goodness! Is he alright?" Inko asked, her eyes wide with alarm. I fixed it," Izuku mumbled, looking down at his shoes. "But I made it weird." Before Inko could decipher his cryptic statement, there was a sharp, insistent knock on the door. She stood up and opened it to find a grim-faced Mitsuki Bakugo, with a silent, sullen Katsuki hiding behind her legs. "Inko," Mitsuki said, her voice tight. "We need to talk." "What the hell happened down at the creek?" Katsuki won't say anything coherent, just that Izuku did something. "Look at his arm." She gently pulled Katsuki forward. Inko gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. In the clear light of the hallway, the difference in Katsuki's arms was more pronounced. She knelt down, her medical training as a part-time nurse kicking in. She felt the skin, noted the size, her expression shifting from concern to utter bewilderment. "There was a cut," she murmured, looking from the flawless arm to Izuku, who was trembling by the door. "A bad one?" Katsuki finally spoke, his voice muffled by his mother's leg. "It was bleeding everywhere. Then Deku touched it, and there was a green light. He made it wrong." All eyes fell on Izuku. He felt like a bug under a microscope. Izuku? Inko's voice was barely a whisper. A green light? He nodded miserably. And then he mentioned the other strange sensation. My head, it felt funny. Right here. He pointed to a spot on his forehead, just at the edge of his unruly hair. Inko gently brushed his bangs aside. Her fingers froze. There, almost hidden, was a tiny, hard bump. It was no bigger than a grain of rice, pale ivory in color, and smooth to the touch. It looked like the very beginning of a horn. A physical mutation. A telltale sign of a powerful quirk. The two mothers shared a look of dawning, shared dread. This was beyond scraped knees and childhood squabbles. This was quirk manifestation. A bizarre, potent, and terrifying one. The following day, Izuku found himself in the cold, sterile environment of the Takoba Municipal Hospital, sitting on a crinkly paper sheet in an examination room. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. He was dwarfed by the anatomical charts on the walls, pictures of skeletons and muscle groups that seemed to mock the memory of what he'd done to Katsuki's arm. His mother sat beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were puffy, and she kept casting worried glances at him, then at the door, then back again. The door finally opened, and Dr. Kyudaigaraki, a portly man with thick glasses and a bushy mustache, entered holding a tablet. He was the region's leading quirk specialist, the same man who had diagnosed Katsuki's explosion quirk a few months prior. His demeanor, however, was far from the cheerful congratulations he had offered the Bakugos. He looked deeply serious, his brow furrowed in concentration. Mrs. Midoriya Izuku, he began, pulling up a stool. He didn't smile. We've run the tests based on your account and the examination of young Katsuki. It's quite extraordinary, unprecedented, in my experience. Inko leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly. What is it, doctor? What is his quirk? Dr. Garaki sighed, adjusting his glasses. At its most basic level, we are classifying it as an emitter/transformation hybrid. The light emission is the emitter aspect, but the physical horn, however small, points to a transformation element. But the function is the truly remarkable part. We are calling it rewind. He turned the tablet towards them. It showed a complex diagram of a DNA helix. From what we can gather, your son's quirk allows him to reverse the state of matter he is in physical contact with, not just healing. He isn't adding cells or accelerating a natural process like Recovery Girl. He is literally, causally, reverting an object or a person to a previous point in its timeline. Inko stared blankly. I don't understand, the doctor simplified. He didn't heal Katsuki's arm. He rewound it to a state before it was injured. The problem is, his control is non-existent. It's like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. He rewound the injury, but he overshot the mark, rewinding the arm's development by, our best guess, about 18 months. Izuku shrank, the clinical explanation making his mistake feel even more monstrous. Is it dangerous? Inko whispered, her worst fear hanging in the air. The doctor's expression became grave. Potentially, it is one of the most dangerous quirks I have ever encountered. Think of the implications, Mrs. Midoriya. He rewound an arm. What if he touched someone's head and rewound their brain development? What if he touched their entire body? Could he revert a grown man to a child? A baby? An embryo? Could he rewind a person so far they revert to a pre-quirk evolutionary state? Or simply rewind them out of existence altogether? A horrified gasp escaped Inko's lips. She instinctively pulled Izuku closer, as if to shield him from the doctor's terrifying words, from the very power that lived inside him. Izuku felt a profound, soul-deep cold. Erase them? The idea was so horrifying it barely felt real. He just wanted to help people, to be like All Might. But his power wasn't a smash. It was an undo button for reality itself. He cannot be allowed to use this quirk freely. The doctor continued, his tone clinical but firm. Not until he demonstrates a significant level of control, which could take years, if it's even possible. For his safety, and for the safety of others, we have to register him accordingly. His quirk will be flagged in the national database as high risk, unstable. It will necessitate regular check-ins and mandated counseling once he's older. I'm sorry. The finality in the doctor's voice was crushing. Izuku wasn't just a boy with a new quirk. He was a risk. A danger. A walking, talking catastrophe waiting to happen. He looked down at his hands. The doctor's words echoed in his head, twisting with Katsuki's screams. Freak. Monster. Dangerous. Unstable. He curled his fingers into a fist, hiding them from view. He hated them. He hated his quirk. The world after the doctor's visit was a smaller, quieter place. The news spread through the parental grapevine with the speed of a wildfire. The official, sanitized version was that Izuku had a powerful but unstable healing quirk. The playground version, likely twisted and exaggerated from a terrified Katsuki, was far more sinister. Deku has a monster quirk. He touched Kaken and almost made his arm disappear. Don't let him touch you. He became an outcast. It was a different kind of ostracism from the one he might have faced for being quirkless. He wasn't ignored. He was actively avoided. Children would shrink back if he came too close, whispering behind their hands. When they picked teams for games, he was always last, an unwanted variable. His attempts to be friendly were met with suspicion and fear. Katsuki's reaction was the most painful. Their friendship wasn't just broken, it was annihilated. In its place grew a strange, aggressive animosity. Katsuki's bullying took on a new, desperate edge. He would shove Izuku, but always with a quick, explosive blast to create distance, a warning shot. He'd taunt him, calling him Deku, not with the familiar, almost affectionate condescension of before, but with genuine venom. The core of it all was fear. Every time he looked at Izuku, he was reminded of his own vulnerability, of the day his body was violated by a power he couldn't comprehend. He built a wall of anger and violence around himself to keep the source of that fear, his former best friend, as far away as possible. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, Inko came into Izuku's room. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by his All Might merchandise, but not playing. He was just staring. In her hands she held a small, neatly folded pair of soft, white cotton gloves. Here, honey, she said softly, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. I thought these might help. Until you feel more comfortable. Izuku looked at the gloves, then at his own hands. He understood. They were a cage. A way to protect the world from him, and him from himself. He slowly, obediently, slipped them on. They felt strange, a thin but impenetrable barrier between him and everything else. From that day on, he was never without them. The years passed in a blur of isolation. He was Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the scary quirk. The boy with the gloves. The boy who always kept his head down, his hair grown just a little too long to make sure the tiny, ivory horn on his forehead remained his own shameful secret. One night, when he was 10, he sat in his desk chair, the glow of his computer monitor illuminating his face. On the screen, All Might, in his glorious prime, was carrying a bus full of people out of a flood, his signature, booming laugh echoing even through the tinny speakers. He was saving everyone. He was in perfect control. He punched villains, but he never hurt the innocent. His power was a shield for others, a source of hope. Izuku muted the video. The triumphant music died, leaving only the silent, powerful image. His eyes drifted from the screen to his own gloved hands resting on the desk. Hope felt like a distant, foreign concept. How could he ever be like All Might? How could a hero who saves people have hands that could unmake them? A new resolve, born from years of quiet desperation, began to solidify within him. If he couldn't control his quirk through instinct, he would have to control it through intellect. If his body betrayed him, his mind would have to be his salvation. He pulled a brand new notebook from a stack on his shelf. The cover was plain black. He opened it to the first page and picked up a pen. With a steady, determined hand, he wrote the title, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. He wasn't just a fan anymore. He was a researcher. He started with All Might, but he didn't write about his strength, or his speed. He wrote about his precision. He drew diagrams of All Might saving people from a collapsing building, analyzing how he distributed his force, how he braced the structure, how he shielded civilians with his own body. He was studying the art of containment. After several pages, he paused. He turned to a fresh, blank sheet. He hesitated for a long moment, then wrote a new title at the top. Quirk Analysis. Rewind? The question mark felt essential. Below it, he began to list everything he knew, everything the doctor had said. Type, emitter/transformation. Function, temporal reversion of matter via physical contact. Known effects, reversal of physical injury, reversal of biological growth. Dangers, lack of fine control. Potential for complete biological/causal erasure. High stamina cost. He always felt exhausted after even thinking about it. Goal, learn to control the stop point. Learn intent. Learn to mend without unmaking. He stared at the page, a clinical breakdown of his own personal curse. It was terrifying. But for the first time, it felt like something he could study, something he could perhaps, one day, understand. He looked up from the notebook, his gaze landing on his reflection in the dark computer screen. A lonely boy with sad green eyes, a mess of dark hair hiding a tiny horn, and hands that were swathed in white. The journey to becoming a hero seemed impossibly long, a dark, treacherous path. But as he looked down at the data he had written, at the beginning of a plan, a tiny, flickering ember of hope ignited in the vast darkness of his fear. It wasn't the explosive, confident fire of Kakin's Quirk, but a quiet, steady flame of determination. He would learn. He would study. He would understand. He would find a way to turn the quirk that takes away into a power that could truly save. He had to. For 10 years, Izuku Midoriya had perfected the art of untouchability. He moved through the crowded hallways of Aldera Junior High like a ghost, his shoulders perpetually hunched, his presence minimized to an art form. His hands, always sheathed in their plain white cotton gloves, were kept balled in his pockets, or clasped tightly behind his back. He learned the subtle dance of avoidance, sidestepping a friendly shoulder pat, flinching back from a proffered handshake, never, ever engaging in the roughhousing that passed for camaraderie among his peers. Each near contact was a jolt of adrenaline, a spike of cold dread that reminded him of what he was. He was a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. His isolation was his shield, and his obsession was his training ground. After school, while other kids were at the arcade or playing sports, Izuku was at his own personal dojo, the internet. He consumed hero fight footage with a scholar's intensity, his fingers flying across the keyboard. His notebooks, now numbering in the double digits, were less fanboy gushing and more like tactical treatises. Okay, Kamui Woods versus the industrial chemical smuggler, he muttered to himself, pausing a shaky bystander video on his monitor. His lacquer chain prison is effective for capture, but his composition makes him highly vulnerable to fire. The villain has a minor flame-breathing quirk. A bad matchup. Kamui's strategy should have been containment from a distance, focusing on environmental takedowns, not direct engagement. He wasn't just watching heroes win. He was studying how they controlled chaos, how they mitigated collateral damage, how they wielded immense power with surgical precision. Every hero was a lesson in what he lacked. Every controlled punch, every carefully placed rescue, was a testament to a level of finesse he could only dream of. His own power had no nuance. It was a sledgehammer for an operation that required a scalpel. The only person who refused to let him fade into the background was the one who had put him there. Out of my way, Deku. The voice was low and guttural, a familiar growl that cut through the noise of the dismissing students. Izuku froze, his hand hovering over the strap of his yellow backpack. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his crimson eyes narrowed into slits, his school uniform looking too tight on his broad, muscular shoulders. He and his two cronies blocked the doorway, a casual display of dominance that made the other students give them a wide berth. Sorry, Kakin, Izuku stammered, shrinking back against his desk. Bakugo scoffed, a curl of his lip showing his teeth. Still wearing those stupid gloves, huh? You ever take them off, or are you scared you'll accidentally erase your own face? His friend snickered. The jab was pointed and cruel, a direct shot at the source of a decade-old trauma. This was their ritual. Bakugo's bullying wasn't the simple superiority complex he displayed with others. With Izuku, it was a constant, aggressive reinforcement of the barrier between them. He needed Izuku to remain the weird, pathetic Deku, because the alternative, the boy with the terrifying, incomprehensible power that had once warped his very flesh, was a memory he'd spent 10 years trying to suppress with anger and arrogance. "Don't you dare apply to UA, you got it?" Bakugo leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. A tiny, warning crackle of an explosion popped in his palm, the smell of burnt sugar a punctuation mark of intimidation. It wasn't an attack. It was a reminder. Stay away. A freak like you has no place there. Heroes save people. They don't unmake them. With that final, venomous shot, he straightened up and stalked out of the room, his lackeys trailing in his wake. Izuku's shoulders slumped in relief. He waited until the classroom was completely empty before slowly putting his notebook into his backpack. Unmake them. The word echoed in his head, a perfect summary of his deepest fear. Kaken was right. What business did a monster have in a pantheon of gods? He took a different route home that day, a long, meandering path under a series of overpasses, needing the quiet solitude to soothe his frayed nerves. He pulled out his charred notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, which Bakugo had casually exploded and tossed out the window before his final threat. It was salvageable. Most of it. He was so engrossed in trying to decipher his singed notes on Empty Lady's debut that he didn't hear the gurgling, sloshing sound from the sewer grate until it was too late. A monstrous, liquid form erupted from the manhole, a tidal wave of putrid green sludge and floating eyeballs. It smelled of raw sewage and decay. "A medium-sized invisibility cloak!" The villain's voice gurgled, a horrifying sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You'll do nicely!" Before Izuku could even scream, the sludge engulfed him. It was a suffocating, terrifying sensation. The viscous fluid forced its way into his mouth and nose, a vile taste filling his senses. He clawed at it, his gloved hands finding no purchase, his lungs burning for air. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. "I'm going to die," he thought, his vision starting to speckle with black dots. And his second thought was even more terrifying. "I'm going to die without ever learning to control it. I'm going to die a monster." In that moment of pure, primal fear, an instinct he had suppressed for a decade roared to life. His quirk. He could use his quirk. He could touch the sludge, rewind it back into whatever disgusting sewer water it had been before it gained sentience. He could save himself, but the doctor's words screamed in his mind. What if you rewind it too far? Back to its base molecules? What if the reversion causes a catastrophic energy release? What if you can't stop it and it rewinds the street, the city block, you? His hands, submerged in the villain, trembled with a power he was too terrified to unleash. The choice was to suffocate, or risk annihilation. Texas smash! A concussive blast of wind pressure ripped the sludge villain apart. The suffocating grip vanished, and Izuku fell to the ground, gasping, coughing, and spitting out slime. He looked up, his eyes wide and tear-filled, to see the impossible silhouette standing over him. The V-shaped bangs, the impossibly wide smile, the sheer, overwhelming presence of the number one hero, All Might. The hero quickly captured the dispersed villain in an empty soda bottle. He moved with an easy, practiced grace, his smile never faltering. He even took the time to sign Izuku's charred notebook. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind of shock and starstruck awe. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. He wanted to ask the most important one. The one that had haunted him his entire life. But before he could work up the courage, All Might was preparing to leave. "Stay safe, citizen. I must get this fellow to the authorities. For justice," he boomed, crouching for a leap. In a moment of desperation that defied all reason and self-preservation, Izuku did the unthinkable. He lunged and latched onto All Might's leg just as the hero launched himself into the sky. The wind roared past him, a deafening gale that threatened to tear him from his perch. All Might looked down, his famous smile replaced with a comical look of shock. "Hey now! Fanboyism is one thing, but this is a bit much." They landed roughly on a nearby rooftop. Izuku's legs felt like jelly. He was trembling from head to toe, a combination of the near-death experience and the sheer audacity of what he had just done. "That was very reckless," All Might chided, his hands on his hips. I love my fans, but that was a good way to get yourself killed. Now I'm out of time. Bang on the door for a while, and someone will let you down. As the hero turned to leave, Izuku's voice finally broke free, raw and desperate. Wait. I have to ask you something. All Might paused. And then, something terrible happened. Steam began to pour off his body, like a kettle coming to a boil. In a grotesque puff of smoke, the mountain of muscle deflated, replaced by a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Izuku stared, his own problems momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer, uncomprehending shock. You're not All Might! You're an imposter! A fake! The man sighed, a weary, rattling sound. I am All Might, he said, sitting down heavily on the rooftop floor. He lifted his shirt to reveal a horrifying, swirling scar that covered the entire left side of his torso, a vortex of ruined flesh that spoke of an injury beyond imagination. I got this in a fight 5 years back. My respiratory system is shot. I had my stomach removed. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, this is me. The truth settled on Izuku with the weight of a physical blow. The symbol of peace, the unshakable pillar of their society, was broken. He was running on fumes. All Might looked at him, his gaze piercing. Now you had a question. Let's hear it, kid. Then you'll forget you saw me like this. The question Izuku had planned to ask, the one he had practiced in the mirror 1,000 times, lodged in his throat. His personal crisis felt so small, so insignificant in the face of this world-shattering revelation. But the need was still there, a raw, open wound. He took a shaky breath. My whole life, I've wanted to be a hero. More than anything. But my quirk, it's not a hero's quirk. It's... His voice broke. Just then, a massive explosion rocked the city a few blocks away. Both of them whipped their heads around. A plume of black smoke was rising into the sky. All Might cursed under his breath, clutching his side. Damn it! Not now. The villain must have escaped when you latched onto me. He started for the stairs, then stopped, a coughing fit racking his skeletal frame. He was out of time. Drawn by a morbid sense of dread, Izuku crept to the edge of the roof. Down below, a crowd had gathered. And in the middle of the street, surrounded by fire and wreckage, was the sludge villain, and he had a hostage with spiky blonde hair, whose hands were letting off frantic, desperate explosions. Kaken. The world tilted on its axis. Izuku's blood ran cold. The villain was using Katsuki's explosion quirk, creating a cyclone of fire and destruction that kept the other heroes at bay. Death Arms was too slow, Empty Lady was too big for the narrow street, and Kamui Woods was, as Izuku had analyzed just that morning, weak to fire. They were helpless, and Katsuki was suffocating. His eyes, wide with terror and rage, met Izuku's from across the distance. It was the same terrified look he'd had by the creek all those years ago. The look of an invincible boy discovering his own mortality. And Izuku just stood there, frozen. All Might stood beside him, equally helpless, clutching his wound and muttering about his own powerlessness. The heroes on the ground weren't moving. No one was saving him. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. I can't do anything. My quirk, if I touch the villain, I could erase it. But what if I touch Kaken by mistake? What if I overshoot? What if I revert Kaken to a baby right there in the middle of the street? Or worse? The sludge is a fluid. How do you even rewind a fluid? What if it's connected to Kaken so deeply that I can't separate them? He saw Kaken's struggles weaken. His explosions became smaller, more sporadic. He was losing. My hands are for unmaking things, he thought, his own gloved hands trembling. They are not the hands of a hero. But then he saw it. Kaken's eyes. For a split second, the terror was replaced by a look of pleading desperation. He wasn't looking at the pro-heroes. He was looking right at Izuku, and in that moment, something inside Izuku snapped. All the analysis, all the fear, all the self-loathing, it was all incinerated by a single, primal, heroic impulse. His friend was dying, his legs moved on their own. He wasn't thinking. He was just moving. He scrambled down the fire escape, hit the ground running, and burst through the police line before anyone could react. The heroes yelled at him. The crowd gasped. He didn't hear them. All he heard was the pounding of his own heart and the gurgling laughter of the villain. "It's you again!" The villain snarled as Izuku sprinted toward him. "I'll kill you this time!" But Izuku wasn't just flailing. His mind, honed by years of analysis, was working at lightning speed, even through the panic. Can't touch him. Can't use the quirk. Need a distraction. An opening. A non-contact solution. His eyes darted around the battlefield. He saw the heroes, their positions, their limitations. He saw the villain's form, how it held Katsuki. He saw the villain's eyes, his only solid, vulnerable point. He swung his yellow backpack off his shoulder, a desperate, Hail Mary play. "Take this!" he screamed, and hurled it with all his might. The heavy bag, filled with textbooks and notebooks, flew through the air and struck the villain squarely in one of his floating eyeballs. The villain roared in pain and surprise, his gelatinous body recoiling for a split second. Katsuki's mouth and nose were freed for a precious moment. He sucked in a desperate gasp of air. "Kaken!" Izuku yelled, clawing at the sludge, trying to dig his friend out. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Katsuki choked out, his voice a mix of terror and fury. "Get away! I couldn't just stand there and watch you die!" Izuku screamed back, his fingers slipping on the slimy surface. This was it. The moment of truth. He had no other plan. His analytical brain had failed him. All that was left was the horrifying, final option. He had to touch him. He had to use his quirk and pray to a god he didn't believe in that he wouldn't erase his oldest friend. He pulled back his right hand, ready to rip off the glove, to unleash the monster he'd kept caged for a decade. "I really am pathetic," the voice came from behind him. Izuku turned. All Might, in his full, muscle-bound form, stood there, his smile gone, replaced by a look of profound self-recrimination. "I stand here lecturing you about what makes a hero," he said, his voice resonating with power, "when I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero." He grabbed Izuku's arm, pulling him back from the villain. Then, he reared back his fist. "Detroit!" Smash! The punch was a cataclysm. It didn't just strike the villain, it changed the weather. The sheer air pressure generated a torrential downpour, extinguishing the fires and washing the street clean. The sludge villain was splattered into 1,000 harmless droplets. Katsuki lay on the pavement, gasping but alive. Silence. Then, the crowd roared. In the aftermath, Izuku got an earful. The pro-heroes berated him for his recklessness, for interfering, for being a liability. Meanwhile, they praised Katsuki for his bravery and his powerful quirk. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Katsuki himself stomped over to Izuku later, as he was collecting the scattered, soaking contents of his backpack. "I didn't need your help," he growled, his voice still hoarse. He was trembling, whether from rage or the lingering fear, Izuku couldn't tell. "I had it handled. Don't you ever look at me like I'm someone who needs saving by a freak like you. Don't you dare think you can touch me. Got it?" He turned and stalked off without waiting for a reply. He hadn't thanked him. He had threatened him. It was the only way he knew how to process the fact that Izuku, the useless Deku, had been the only one to move. And it was the only way he knew how to keep the terror of Izuku's quirk at bay. Izuku walked home, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He had failed. He had been reckless. He hadn't saved anyone. All Might had. He was just a boy with a dangerous power and an overactive hero complex. Maybe Kaken and the doctor were right. He couldn't be a hero. He was too much of a risk. "I am here!" Izuku jumped, spinning around to see All Might, in his muscle form, jogging to a halt at the corner of his street. "All Might? What are you doing here? I thought you were swarmed by reporters," Izuku said, flabbergasted. "Getting away from them is easy. For I am All Might, blarg." The hero suddenly deflated in another puff of steam, reverting to his skeletal form and spitting a shocking amount of blood onto the pavement. Izuku shrieked in alarm. Toshinori Yagi, the man behind the smile, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Kid, I came here to thank you. And to apologize. And to make you an offer. Izuku stared, completely baffled. Thank me? But I didn't do anything. I just got in the way. That's not true, Toshinori said, his voice soft but firm. At the scene, out of everyone there, the pros, the onlookers, everyone, you were the only one who acted. A scared young man with, as far as I knew, no power to speak of. You ran in while I stood there frozen. He looked down at his own skeletal hands. You moved me to act. You reminded me of what it means to be a hero. Your body moved before you had a chance to think because you saw someone in need of saving. Izuku's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't hold it in anymore. The dam of a decade of fear and self-hatred finally broke. No! You're wrong! He cried, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anguish. I was scared. I just stood there on that roof doing nothing. I have a quirk. A powerful one. But I was too afraid to use it. He ripped the white glove from his right hand, revealing the pale, unblemished skin beneath. He held it up, trembling, presenting it like a piece of damning evidence. My quirk isn't a hero's power, all might. It's a curse. He sobbed, the tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. When I was 4, I used it to heal my friend. He had a terrible cut on his arm, and I made it go away. But I didn't just heal him. I rewound his arm. I made it smaller, weaker. I made him a freak. The doctor told my mom my quirk could erase people, erase them. I could rewind someone back to being a baby, or an embryo, or just rewind them into nothing. He was hyperventilating now, the confession he had never spoken aloud tearing from his throat. When I saw Kaken, when I saw the villain, all I could think was, what if I touch him and he's gone forever? What kind of hero is afraid to touch people? What kind of hero has the power to unmake the world in his own hands? I want to save people. I want to save them with a smile, just like you. But how can I save anyone when my quirk can erase them from existence? Tell me. How can a monster like me ever become a hero? He finally collapsed to his knees, his bare hand pressed to the ground, his body shaking with racking sobs. The silence that followed was broken only by his own ragged breathing. Toshinori looked down at the weeping boy, and for the first time, he understood the true depth of the kid's spirit. It wasn't a quirkless boy who had rushed in. It was a boy armed with a power of terrifying, world-breaking potential, a power that could have ended the fight in an instant. And yet, his first, second, and third instincts were to find a way to win without hurting anyone, without resorting to that terrible power. He used his mind. He used the backpack. He tried to claw his friend out with his bare hands. He was willing to do anything to avoid using the monstrous gift he'd been given. This wasn't just a heroic heart. This was a conscience of steel. Toshinori's gaunt face softened, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't the beaming grin of All Might, but the warm, gentle smile of a mentor. He looked up at the sky, a thoughtful expression on his face. A great power requires an even greater will to control it, he said softly, almost to himself. He looked back down at Izuku, and an even purer heart to wield it justly. He took a step forward and knelt down, his lanky frame unfolding awkwardly until he was at eye level with the devastated boy. Young man, he said, his voice filled with a profound, unshakable conviction that cut through Izuku's despair. You have spent your entire life terrified of the power in your hands. You see it as a monster's tool. But I see a boy with the heart of a true hero, who has been shackled by a power he doesn't understand. You possess a power that can undo tragedy, a power of ultimate restoration, and your first instinct is to protect others from it. That, my boy, is more heroic than any punch I have ever thrown. Izuku looked up, his tear-filled green eyes wide with disbelief. And then All Might, the symbol of peace, the greatest hero the world had ever known, spoke the words that would redefine Izuku Midoriya's entire existence. You can become a hero. It wasn't a platitude. It wasn't a hollow encouragement. It was a statement of fact. A diagnosis. A promise. Your journey will be harder than most. Toshinori continued, his voice resonating with newfound purpose. It will not be about gaining a power, but about mastering a terrifying one you already possess. It will be a battle for control, for focus, for will. And I will help you. I will train you. I will teach you how to master not just your quirk, but the heroic spirit that burns so brightly within you. I deem you worthy of my knowledge. My time. He stood up, looking down at the stunned boy. Meet me at the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park tomorrow morning at sunrise. Your training begins then. We will teach that monster's hand to obey your hero's heart. Izuku could only stare, speechless. The world, which had been gray and cold for a decade, suddenly exploded into vibrant color. The fear was still there, a cold stone in the pit of his stomach, but for the first time, it was joined by something else. Something warm and bright and utterly overwhelming. Hope. The sunrise over Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was a filthy, muted thing. For decades, the shoreline had been an illegal dumping ground, a sprawling, metallic graveyard where ocean currents conspired to deposit the city's forgotten junk. Mountains of rusted washing machines, skeletal car frames, and heaps of defunct electronics choked the sand, creating a jagged, artificial mountain range against the backdrop of the rising sun. The air was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and decay. It was, Izuku thought, the perfect place to confront a quirk that specialized in undoing things. For 10 grueling months, this junkyard had been his church, his classroom, and his crucible. And Toshinori Yagi had been his unforgiving high priest. Again, young Midoriya, All Might's voice, even in his skeletal form, boomed across the beach, cutting through the crash of the waves. Izuku stood panting, his hands on his knees, sweat plastering his green hair to his forehead. Before him sat a dented, rust-eaten refrigerator door, propped against a stack of bald tires. His task sounded simple, but it was the hardest thing he had ever done. He had to make it new again. This was the core of his training. It had nothing to do with fighting, and everything to do with focus. Toshinori had quickly realized that Izuku's quirk was tied inextricably to his mental state. His childhood panic had resulted in a chaotic, uncontrolled surge. Therefore, the path to control wasn't through physical exertion, but through meditative discipline. Your quirk isn't a muscle you can flex, my boy, Toshinori had explained on that first day, gesturing to the mountains of trash. It is a river. Right now, when you open the dam, it floods everything. Your goal is to learn how to open it just a trickle. To direct the flow. You must learn to visualize the outcome with absolute clarity before you even begin. So Izuku trained his mind. He would sit for hours in front of a piece of scrap, studying its every flaw. He would close his eyes and build a perfect, three-dimensional model of it in his head. Then, he would try to rewind it. His first attempts had been catastrophic. He tried to fix a bent piece of rebar and accidentally reverted it into a glowing, semi-molten lump of pig iron. He tried to erase a crack in a television screen and turn the entire unit into a pile of its constituent parts: plastic pellets, silicon dust, and copper wiring. Each failure left him dizzy and nauseous, the stamina drain of his quirk feeling like a psychic hangover. But slowly, painstakingly, he began to improve. He learned to anchor his thoughts, to focus not on the broad concept of fixing, but on the specific, singular command. Return to the state before this dent occurred. He took a deep, centering breath, ignoring the burn in his lungs and the trembling in his legs. He placed his gloved hands on the refrigerator door. He didn't rip them off in a panic. He had learned that the gloves were a crutch, a mental barrier. Control meant being able to touch something without activating his quirk unless he willed it. He pressed his bare palms against the cold, rusted metal. Nothing happened. That, in itself, was a victory. He closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the door not as it was, but as it had been. He pictured the pristine white enamel, the crisp logo of the manufacturer, the smooth, unblemished surface. He envisioned the precise moment before the impact that had caused the large, concave dent in its center. He held that single, static image in his mind, clear and unwavering. He let his will flow from his mind, down his arms, and into his hands. The tiny horn at his hairline tingled, a familiar pressure point that signaled his quirk's activation. A soft, green light, no longer a chaotic flood but a gentle, controlled luminescence, seeped from his palms into the metal. He felt the resistance in the metal's timeline, the stubborn inertia of its present state. He pushed against it with his will, The rusted metal began to groan, not from physical pressure, but from a temporal one. The deep brown of the rust faded, receding like a tide, replaced by clean, unoxidized steel. The dent, the focal point of his concentration, began to shallow. The metal popped and buckled, not outward but inward, as if it were being vacuum-formed back into its original shape. Hold it, young Midoriya! Don't overshoot! Toshinori coached from the sidelines. Izuku's teeth were gritted, sweat beading on his brow. The temptation to just flood the object with power was immense. It would be easier, faster. But that was the old way. He held his focus tight, like a surgeon gripping a scalpel, guiding the reversal with pinpoint precision. The last ripple of the dent smoothed out. The moment the surface was perfectly flat, he cut the connection. Stop. The green light vanished. Izuku stumbled back, dizzy and gasping, his stamina bar blinking red in his mind's eye. But when he looked, his heart swelled with a fierce, hard-won pride. The refrigerator door was perfect. It gleamed in the morning sun, a stark white rectangle of impossible newness in a sea of decay. He hadn't just fixed it, he had commanded it. Excellent! Toshinori boomed, giving him a thumbs up. Your focus has improved 1,000-fold. You're maintaining the state for longer with less strain. While his quirk control had been the primary focus, All Might had not neglected his physical conditioning. The logic was twofold. First, a hero needed to be physically capable. Second, and more importantly for Izuku, the American dream plan of cleaning the entire beach was a monumental exercise in mental fortitude. Hauling rusted engine blocks and waterlogged couches built not just muscle, but the kind of stubborn, unrelenting endurance he would need to master his quirk. As the months wore on, the beach began to transform. So did Izuku. The scrawny, trembling boy was replaced by a lean, wiry young man. His shoulders broadened, and his arms, once thin as sticks, now showed the clear definition of muscle earned through relentless labor. He still had the same wild green hair and constellation of freckles, but his eyes held a new light, not the terrified flicker of before, but the steady, determined flame of someone who had stared into his own personal abyss and had begun the long, arduous process of building a bridge across it. On the morning of the UA entrance exam, the beach was unrecognizable. The sand was clean, stretching down to meet the sparkling blue water, completely clear of junk for the first time in generations. Izuku stood atop the final, towering pile of scrap, silhouetted against the dawn. He let out a primal scream of triumph, a sound that wasn't born of arrogance, but of pure, cathartic release. Toshinori, in his muscle form, stood below, a proud smile on his face. You did it, my boy! You turned this illegal dumping ground back into a beautiful coastline. You took something broken and you mended it. A fine act of hero-ing before you even have your license. Izuku slid down the pile of junk, landing lightly on the sand. He was exhausted but buzzing with a nervous energy that felt like lightning in his veins. So now? Izuku asked, his voice trembling with anticipation. The other part of their plan. The secret inheritance. One for all. All Might had broached the subject 6 months in, explaining the nature of his quirk, its history, and his desire to pass it on. Izuku had been floored, but he also understood the logic. His own quirk, Rewind, was powerful but situational. It was a recovery tool, a reset button. It wasn't suited for direct, prolonged combat. It was too slow, too risky, and too draining. One for all would be his shield, the offensive power that would allow him to fight and protect, so that Rewind could be the tool he used to heal and restore after the battle was won. Yes, All Might said, his smile widening. He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. Now, my boy, eat this. Izuku stared at the hair, then at All Might's dead serious expression. Ha! The auditorium at UA High was colossal. Izuku sat wedged between a boy with explosive blonde hair he tried very hard not to look at, and another boy with engines sticking out of his calves. He felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He had the power of All Might, or at least a single, undigested strand of it, coursing through his veins, but he felt more like an imposter than ever. He hadn't had time to practice with it, not even a single punch. It sat inside him like an unexploded ordnance, a second, alien power coiled alongside his own. The voice hero, Present Mike, explained the rules of the practical exam. They would be fighting giant robots in a simulated city environment. Each robot had a point value, 1, 2, or 3. Destroying them earned points. It was simple, straightforward, and for Izuku, a complete nightmare. His entire training had been about not destroying things. It had been about precision, control, and restoration. How was he supposed to compete? He couldn't just touch a 30-foot robot and rewind it to a pile of raw materials. The process would take minutes he didn't have, and the stamina drain would leave him useless after a single attempt. And one for all? All Might's warning echoed in his ears. Even with your new physique, your body is not yet a proper vessel. If you try to use it at 100%, your limbs will likely explode. So he had 2 god-tier quirks, and both were effectively useless. He was assigned to Battle Center B. As he stood before the massive gates, surrounded by other examinees buzzing with confidence and crackling with power, his heart hammered against his ribs. He saw the kind-faced, brown-haired girl from the orientation. She seemed nervous, too. He wanted to wish her luck, but the boy with the glasses and engines, the one from the auditorium, intercepted him, delivering a stern lecture about distracting others. Izuku just wanted to melt into the pavement and begin. Present Mike's voice blared from unseen speakers. The gates slid open. While the other students surged forward, Izuku stood frozen for a beat, paralyzed by indecision. What are you waiting for? There's no countdown in a real fight. The voice snapped him out of it. He sprinted into the mock city, his mind racing. Okay. Think. Analyze. Don't fight their way. Fight my way. He couldn't destroy the robots. But he didn't have to. The goal was to score points by defeating them. Defeat didn't have to mean destruction. It could mean incapacitation. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a 1-point robot. It was a bipedal machine with a single red optic, rolling forward on tank treads. It swiveled to face him, its mechanical arms whirring as it prepared to attack. Instead of running or trying to punch it, Izuku's eyes scanned it from top to bottom. He wasn't looking at it as a target. He was looking at it as a machine. Joints, actuators, power source, structural weaknesses. His analytical mind, honed by years of studying heroes and 10 months of deconstructing junk, took over. The robot lunged. Izuku dodged, his new physique making him far more agile than he'd ever been. He slid past its leg and saw it, a cluster of exposed hydraulic cables near the ankle joint, thinly shielded by a flimsy plate. He grabbed a piece of jagged scrap metal from a nearby pile of debris. As the robot turned, he jammed the metal shard deep into the joint, severing the cables with a shower of sparks and hydraulic fluid. The robot's leg seized up. It stumbled, lost its balance, and crashed heavily onto its side, twitching but immobile. 1 point, Izuku thought, a grim smile touching his lips. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. This became his strategy. He became a ghost in the city, a saboteur instead of a brawler. He used his agility to avoid direct confrontation, his mind to identify weaknesses, and the city's debris as his tools. He lured a 2-pointer into a narrow alley and used a discarded steel beam to create a lever, toppling it over. He found a group of 1-pointers and short-circuited their central power conduit with a puddle of water and a live wire he'd torn from a lamppost. He was racking up points, but not many. His methods were slow, deliberate, and physically taxing. He saw other examinees blasting robots to smithereens with flashy, powerful quirks. He saw Katsuki flying through the air on his explosions, a whirlwind of destruction, his point counter likely soaring into the stratosphere. A familiar pang of inadequacy hit him, but he pushed it down. My fight. My way. He was scaling the side of a building to get a better vantage point when the ground began to tremble. A shadow fell over the entire city block. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. It was the 0-pointer. The arena trap Present Mike had mentioned. It was a mechanid leviathan, a robot so massive it dwarfed the surrounding skyscrapers. Its single red eye glowed with malevolent intent as it swiped a colossal arm, pulverizing a 5-story building into dust and rubble. It's insane! Students screamed, turning and running for their lives. It's not worth any points! Just run! Izuku's first instinct was the same. This was a force of nature, an obstacle to be avoided, not confronted. He turned to flee with the rest of the panicking crowd, and then he heard the cry. "Ow! My leg!" He stopped dead. He turned back toward the chaos. There, in the path of the advancing zero-pointer, was the kind-faced girl with the brown hair. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a massive slab of fallen concrete from the building the robot had just destroyed. She was trying desperately to push it off, her face pale with terror and pain as the monstrous robot bore down on her. The other students ran past her, their own survival their only priority. The proctors watching on the monitors leaned forward, their hands hovering over emergency stop buttons. But Izuku didn't see a no-win scenario. He saw someone who needed help. He saw the sludge villain. He saw Kaken's terrified eyes. He saw All Might's words echoing in his mind. Your body moved before you had a chance to think because you saw someone in need of saving. He didn't think. He ran. He sprinted toward the girl, toward the giant robot, into the heart of the danger. The world seemed to slow down. His mind, no longer clouded by fear or doubt, became a crystal-clear tactical display. Problem, girl trapped. Threat, advancing robot. Solution required, free the girl. Option 1, use one for all. He could punch the robot. But All Might's warning, his limbs would explode. He'd be a one-shot hero, useless after the first punch, and might even hurt the girl with the shockwave. Option 2, use rewind on the robot. Impossible. Too big. Too slow. Too much energy. Option 3, use rewind on the girl's injury. Too risky. He didn't know the extent of the damage. A rushed, panicked heal could be catastrophic. What if he overshot and de-aged her leg? Unacceptable risk. Option 4, the rubble. He reached her side. Are you okay? He yelled over the grinding roar of the approaching behemoth. My leg! It's stuck! She cried, her brown eyes wide with panic. Izuku looked at the slab of concrete pinning her. It was immense, several tons at least. He couldn't lift it. He couldn't punch it away without pulverizing her leg. But he didn't have to. His training with Tashinori flashed in his mind. The refrigerator door. The bent rebar. The cracked screen. It's all just matter in a certain state. This concrete wasn't a solid object. It was a broken object. It was a piece of a once whole building. Its current state was shattered. He placed his bare hands flat on the rough, dusty surface of the concrete. The zero-pointer's shadow completely engulfed them. Its giant metal foot began to lift, preparing to crush them both. He closed his eyes. He didn't visualize a new refrigerator. He visualized the concrete slab not as it was, but as it had been just moments before, a solid, integral part of the building wall. He focused on its structural integrity. He focused on its state of being unbroken. Reverse the damage. Rewind the break. The tingle on his forehead flared into a sharp, intense pressure. His horn glowed with a brilliant emerald light that was visible even through his hair. The light flowed from his palms, not as a gentle stream, but as a powerful, focused surge. The concrete didn't lift. It began to change. A web of green energy spread across the slab's surface. The myriad cracks, fissures, and fractures that composed its broken state began to seal. Dust and small pebbles were drawn back into the main body. The concrete groaned, not from strain, but from a fundamental reordering of its own history. He wasn't trying to make it whole again. He was just rewinding it a few seconds, back to a point where its internal structure was less compromised. The effect was immediate and dramatic. By partially reversing the damage, he fundamentally destroyed its structural integrity as a broken piece. The internal stresses became too great. The slab didn't become whole. It lost the very properties that were holding it together as a single, massive chunk. With a final, deafening crack, the concrete slab didn't just break. It crumbled. It collapsed into a cascade of manageable gravel and dust, releasing the girl's leg. Now! Izuku yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her free. But the backlash from such a massive, concentrated use of his quirk hit him like a physical blow. The world spun. A wave of profound nausea and exhaustion washed over him. His vision grayed at the edges. He had poured almost all of his stamina into that single, massive act of will. He stumbled back, his legs giving out. He looked up just in time to see the zero-pointer's colossal foot descending. He was out of energy. He couldn't run. He couldn't even think. This is it. I saved her, but... And then, a new power, an alien power, answered his desperation. One for all, the sacred torch, roared to life within him. A torrent of raw energy, crackling with green lightning, surged through his entire body. It was too much, a fire hose of power in a garden hose of a body. If I'm going down swinging. Smash! He screamed, the word torn from his soul. He punched upward. All the power of one for all, untamed and absolute, focused into his right arm for a single, incandescent moment. The force of the impact was apocalyptic. It didn't just stop the robot's foot, it traveled up its entire chassis, buckling metal, shattering pistons, and blowing out its central power core in a spectacular explosion. The multi-ton giant shuddered, its red eye flickered and died, and it froze in place, a defeated monument. The recoil, however, was just as devastating. Izuku felt a series of sickening, wet snaps. He looked down. His right arm was a mangled, grotesque ruin, bent at impossible angles, the bones shattered into dozens of pieces, the skin a bruised, swollen purple. Both of his legs, which had braced for the impact, were similarly broken, twisted and useless. The pain was a white-hot supernova that threatened to swallow his consciousness whole. He began to fall from the sky. So this is it, he thought, his vision fading to black. At least, I saved her. As he plummeted toward the hard pavement, he saw the brown-haired girl looking up at him, her face a mask of horrified determination. She slapped her hands together. Release! Suddenly Izuku's body felt weightless. His terrifying descent slowed to a gentle float. He saw the girl vomit from the exertion of her quirk, then collapse. He drifted the last few feet and landed on the ground with a soft, painless thud. Time's up! President Mick's voice boomed, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay there, a broken puppet amidst the wreckage, his consciousness fading in and out. He had destroyed the unkillable robot. He had saved the girl. But what did it matter? He looked at his score counter in his mind's eye. He had a handful of villain points from his sabotage earlier. And the zero-pointer was worth 0. He had crippled himself for nothing. He had failed. In a darkened monitoring room, the faculty of UA watched the screens in stunned silence. Did you see that? One of them exclaimed. He took out the zero-pointer in a single hit. What kind of power is that? But look at his body. Another countered, pointing to a close-up of Izuku's mangled limbs. It's a suicide attack. A quirk that destructive to its user is useless in the long run. But did you see what he did before that? Nizu, the principal, spoke up, his calm voice cutting through the chatter. He replayed the footage on the main screen, isolating Izuku and the trapped girl. He zoomed in on Izuku's hands on the concrete. He didn't lift it. He didn't break it. He disintegrated it. No, that's not right either. It's a reversion-type quirk, a new voice said. Everyone turned. Recovery Girl, the youthful heroine, was staring at the screen, her expression one of intense clinical interest. Extremely rare. He reverted the rubble to a less stable state, causing it to lose cohesion. The level of control and raw power to do that on an object of that size, it's unheard of. A gruff, tired-looking man with long black hair and a scarf, Shota Aizawa, scoffed. So he has 2 powerful quirks and 0 control over either of them. He destroyed the robot but shattered his own body. He rescued the girl but took himself out of the fight immediately. He's a liability. 0 potential. I wouldn't be so sure, Shota, Niza said, his black eyes gleaming with intelligence. He pointed to the scoreboard. He may have only a few villain points. But we have another metric for a reason. He brought up another screen, showing the girl Izuku had saved. Her name was Achiko Uraraka. After recovering, she had gone straight to present Mike, pleading her case. Please! Her voice echoed in the monitoring room. Can you give him some of my points? That boy with the green hair, he saved me. He ran in when everyone else was running away. It wouldn't be right if he failed because he stopped to help me. A few other examinees who had witnessed the event chimed in, agreeing. He had inspired them. Nisa smiled. A hero's job is not just to defeat villains. It is to inspire hope. To risk everything for others. This year, we have plenty of candidates who can break things. But this one, this boy, Izuku Midoriya, knows how to put them back together. And when that fails, he's willing to break himself for the sake of another. He pressed a button, allocating a new set of points to Izuku's name. Rescue points 60. The total score flashed on the screen, placing Izuku Midoriya at the very top of the applicant list. Aizawa grunted, unconvinced but silent. On the battlefield, Izuku's consciousness was fading completely. Just before the darkness took him, Recovery Girl arrived, planting a gentle kiss on his forehead. A wave of amplified healing energy washed over him, and his broken bones began the slow, painful process of knitting themselves back together. His last coherent thought was not one of failure, but of a quiet, profound realization. He had two powers. One to break. One to mend. And on this day, to save one person, he had been forced to use them both. The path ahead was going to be more complicated than he could ever have imagined. The letters U, S, and J had never filled Izuku with such a profound sense of dread. The unforeseen simulation joint was, by all accounts, a hero in training's paradise. It was a colossal dome containing meticulously recreated disaster zones, a shipwreck, a landslide, a conflagration, a flood. It was a playground designed to forge heroes. Yet, as Izuku stood with his classmates from 1A, listening to the space hero, 13 explain the facility, a low, anxious hum vibrated just beneath his skin. He had spent the first 2 weeks at UA in a state of perpetual, high-alert whiplash. One moment, he was a normal high school student, nervously making small talk with the friendly, bubbly girl he'd saved, Achiko Uraraka, and the intensely earnest class president, Tenya Ida. The next, he was facing the cold, logical glare of Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, who threatened expulsion on the first day and whose quirk, erasure, was a terrifying negation of everything Izuku was. Aizawa was a puzzle Izuku couldn't solve. The man was a walking contradiction. His tired, cynical demeanor suggested a complete disillusionment with the hero world, yet his teaching methods, while brutal, were ruthlessly effective. He pushed them to their absolute limits, forcing them to confront their weaknesses head-on. For Izuku, this meant a constant, agonizing battle with one for all. You cannot rely on a quirk that shatters your body, Midoriya, Aizawa had stated flatly after watching Izuku break his finger during a ball-throwing test. It's illogical. Find a way to control it, or find a new career path. The words were harsh, but they were true. Izuku couldn't keep treating one for all like a suicide bomb. His solution, born from desperate late-night analysis, was to try and channel it through a single point, his fingertip, instead of his entire arm. It still broke the finger, but it contained the damage. And that was where his other quirk, his secret curse, became a grimly practical tool. After that first test, hiding in the locker room, he had pulled off his glove, his heart pounding. He'd taken his broken, purple finger in his other hand. Focusing with the same intensity he'd used on the refrigerator door, he visualized his finger before the break, its bones whole, its skin unbruised. A faint, almost imperceptible green light glowed between his hands. There was a wet, popping sound that made him feel sick, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. But when he pulled his hand away, the finger was healed. It was a draining, painful process, a gruesome form of self-repair, but it was his only option. It was his new, secret cycle, break and mend, just to keep up. Now, standing inside the USJ, the sheer scale of the facility was overwhelming. 13 was finishing their speech about quirks and their potential for harm, a lesson Izuku had learned in the most intimate way possible. He looked down at his gloved hands. He was here to learn how to save people. That was the goal. The lights in the massive dome suddenly flickered and died. The central fountain sputtered and went still. A cold, unnatural silence fell over the group. Then, at the bottom of the grand staircase, a swirling vortex of dark purple mist appeared. It writhed like a living thing, a tear in the fabric of reality. From its depths, a single, pale hand emerged, followed by a man covered in them. He was tall and unsettlingly thin, his body adorned with severed hands that gripped his arms, his shoulders, his neck, and one that obscured his face entirely. His posture was a predator's slouch, and the scratchy, agitated sound of his nails against his own neck was audible even from a distance. "Is this part of the training?" Kirishima asked, his voice laced with a nervous excitement. "Wow, they even have fake villains!" Aizawa's reaction told them this was no simulation. He stiffened, his body going rigid. "Stay back!" he yelled, pulling his yellow goggles over his eyes. His scarf-like capture weapon began to float around him, animated with a life of its own. "Those are real villains!" Panic erupted. From the dark portal, a flood of them poured out, thugs and criminals of every shape and size, their faces twisted in malicious glee. But they were just the grunts. The true threats were the man covered in hands and the swirling mist villain beside him. And then there was the third one. A towering, monstrous creature that stepped through the portal last. It was a behemoth of exposed muscle, its skin a dark, bruised purple, its beak-like mouth fixed in a permanent, lipless grin. Its eyes were vacant, set deep within a brain that was visibly exposed on the top of its skull. It was a nightmare given flesh. 13. Protect the students, Aizawa commanded, his voice deadly calm. Kaminari, try to get a signal out. He took a step forward, his gaze locked on the horde below. I'll handle this, he leaped. He was a whirlwind of motion, a dervish of black cloth and calculated violence. He nullified quirks with his gaze, using his capture weapon to bind and throw villains with an efficiency that was breathtaking. He was fighting dozens of them at once, and he was winning. But as 13 herded the students toward the exit, the purple mist villain materialized in front of them, expanding into a massive, shadowy wall. Greetings, the villain's voice echoed, polite and chillingly calm. We are the League of Villains. We've taken the liberty of inviting ourselves to this bastion of heroism to have a little chat with the symbol of peace. We were told All Might would be here. It seems there's been a change in the schedule. His form swirled, yellow eyes glowing in the gloom. No matter. My role remains the same. To scatter you and torture you to death. Before anyone could react, the dark mist enveloped them. Izuku felt a gut-wrenching sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled. The ground vanished from beneath his feet. He was falling, tumbling through a dark, disorienting void. He saw Uraraka vanish into one part of the dome, Kirishima and Bakugo into another. Then, he hit water with a jarring splash. He surfaced, sputtering and disoriented, in the middle of the shipwreck zone. The water was deep and choppy. A massive, villain-controlled ship loomed over him. He wasn't alone. A head with green hair and a long tongue broke the surface nearby. Midoriya-chan? Ribbit. It was Tsuyu Ajiri. Her frog-like abilities made her perfectly at home in the water. A third head popped up, this one topped with purple, ball-like hair. Minoru Mineta was screaming in terror, flailing wildly. We're gonna die! We're gonna be eaten by shark villains! As if on cue, the water around them began to churn. Villains with aquatic quirks, gills, fins, shark-like features, were circling them, closing in like predators. Izuku's mind, despite the panic, kicked into analytical gear. Okay. Situation, surrounded in water. Threats, multiple water-based villains. Allies, Ajiri strong in water, Mineta, Quirk unknown effectiveness. Me, one for all is too destructive, will hurt allies. Rewind is useless on villains at a distance. Ajiri-san, Mineta-kun! He yelled over the splashing. What are your quirks? I can do pretty much whatever a frog can. Tsuyu replied calmly. Stick to walls, extend my tongue, secrete a mild toxin. I've got these sticky balls. Mineta wailed, pulling one from his head. They stick to anything. Super strong. But if I pull too many, I start to bleed. Sticky balls. Izuku's mind raced. Adhesive. Water, a large body of water, a vortex. I have an idea, he yelled. Ajiri-san, can you throw me and Mineta-kun toward the center of them? Tsuyu gave a nod. She wrapped her long, powerful tongue around their waists. With a mighty heave, she launched them into the air. They sailed over the heads of the closing villains. Mineta-kun, now! Izuku screamed. As many as you can, Mineta, crying hysterically, began ripping the purple balls from his head and throwing them frantically into the water. They scattered across the surface, a minefield of sticky purple spheres. "Now for my part!" Izuku took a deep breath. He held up his hand, aiming his forefinger at the surface of the water. He focused, channeling a tiny fraction of one for all. Not an explosion. A flick. A single, concentrated burst of power. Delaware. Smash! He flicked his finger. The air cracked. The recoil shattered the bone with a sickening snap, sending a bolt of pure agony up his arm. But the effect was exactly what he'd planned. A massive column of air pressure slammed into the water, creating a powerful, swirling whirlpool. The villains, caught by surprise, were sucked into the vortex. The churning water smashed them into each other, and into Mineta's incredibly sticky balls. Within seconds they were a single, massive, writhing clump of villainy, helplessly stuck together, and swirling in the center of the whirlpool. They landed back on the ship, Izuku clutching his broken, throbbing finger. Tsuyu pulled herself aboard a moment later. "That was amazing, Midoriya-chan." "Ribbit," she said, impressed. "But your finger." "It's okay," Izuku gasped, his face pale with pain. "I can deal with it." He discreetly turned away, pulling his glove off with his teeth and grabbing his broken finger. He focused, bracing himself. Rewind. The faint green glow, the sickening pop, the wave of dizziness. He slid the glove back on, his hand trembling but whole. Mineta was sobbing with relief. "We're alive! Midoriya, you're incredible! You're like a god!" But Izuku wasn't looking at the defeated villains. His eyes were fixed on the shore, on the central plaza. His heart plummeted into his stomach. Down below, the battle was not going well. Aizawa was still fighting, a phantom of fury and skill, but he was slowing down. The sheer number of villains was wearing him out. He had to blink more frequently, giving villains with powerful quirks brief windows to attack. And then the hand-covered man, Shigaraki, made his move. He dashed forward with an unnatural, gliding speed. Aizawa erased his quirk and lashed out with his capture weapon, but Shigaraki was fast. He dodged and closed the distance, his hand outstretched. He grabbed Aizawa's elbow. A gray, cracked pattern spread from his fingertips. Aizawa cried out in pain as the skin and cloth of his elbow crumbled away into dust. Decay, Izuku realized with horror. His quirk is decay. It was the horrifying antithesis of his own power. Shigaraki didn't unmake. He annihilated, and then the monster, the one Shigaraki called Nomu, attacked. It moved with a speed that defied its massive size. In the split second Aizawa was reeling from the decay attack, the Nomu was on him. It grabbed his head and slammed it into the concrete with a sickening crunch. It lifted him up and broke his arm with a casual, brutal snap. It was a horrifying, one-sided beatdown. The three students on the ship could only watch in stunned silence. Their teacher, the formidable Eraserhead, was being systematically, brutally dismantled. "We have to help him," Tsuyu whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you crazy?" Mineta shrieked. "That thing is a monster! We'll be killed!" But Izuku wasn't listening. He was watching his teacher being murdered. He saw the Nomu raise a massive fist for a final, crushing blow. He saw the blood pooling around Aizawa's head. He saw the same helplessness he'd felt when Katsuki was caught by the sludge villain. The same cold dread. And something inside him, a deep, primal instinct that he had spent his entire life suppressing, finally broke its chains. He forgot about one for all. He forgot about strategy and analysis. He forgot about the risk of overshooting, of erasing, of unmaking. All he felt was a single, overwhelming, white-hot thought: save him. He moved. He leaped from the ship, a drop of 20 feet, and hit the shore running. He didn't feel the impact on his legs. He was a green and white blur, a streak of pure, unthinking desperation. "Midoriya-chan!" Tsuyu cried out behind him. Shigaraki, who had been enjoying the spectacle, looked up in surprise. "Oh? Another player has entered the game?" Izuku didn't slow down. He saw the Noma's fist descending toward Aizawa's skull. He saw the moment stretch out, an eternity of horrifying clarity. He wasn't going to make it in time to stop the blow, but he didn't have to. He had to undo it. He lunged forward, sliding the last few feet on the hard ground. He shoved the Noma's descending arm aside with all his strength, a feat that felt like pushing against a concrete wall. The blow missed Aizawa's head, smashing into the ground beside him and shattering the stone. In that same motion, Izuku placed both of his bare, unloved hands directly on Aizawa's broken, bleeding head. Time stopped. He didn't try to control it. He didn't try to meter it out. He opened the floodgates. He let the river of his quirk run wild, pouring every ounce of his will, his desperation, and his stamina into a single, explosive act of restoration. A blinding, viridian light erupted from his hands, enveloping Aizawa's upper body. It wasn't the gentle, focused glow of his training. It was a chaotic, brilliant nova of raw power. The tiny horn on his forehead burned with a cold fire, glowing so brightly it was visible to everyone in the plaza. The effect was instantaneous and miraculous. The horrifying crunch of Aizawa's skull breaking was reversed with a series of sickening, wet popping sounds. The crushed bone reformed, the swelling receded, the deep laceration sealed, and the torrent of blood vanished as if it had never been. The arm the Nomu had snapped straight with another loud crack. The elbow Shigaraki had decayed, the skin and muscle crumbling to dust, was the epicenter of the light. The dust swirled, recoalesced, and reformed. Skin, muscle, and bone knitted themselves back together from nothingness. He overshot. In his panicked, desperate state, his control was non-existent. He didn't just heal the injuries. He rewound his teacher. The faint, old scar under Aizawa's right eye, a remnant from a past battle, a part of his history, faded away, leaving smooth, unblemished skin behind. The accumulated fatigue of the battle, the minor cuts and bruises, the very exhaustion in his cells, it was all wiped clean. Aizawa's body was returned to a state of pristine, unfatigued health. The light faded. Izuku collapsed forward, utterly and completely drained, the world turning into a gray, swimming haze. The backlash was immense, a psychic tidal wave that left him dizzy and trembling, every cell in his body screaming from the exertion. There was a moment of profound silence in the central plaza. The grunt villains stared, dumbfounded. Tsuyu and Mineta, watching from the shore, could only gape in disbelief. Aizawa, whose consciousness had been fading, blinked, his mind suddenly clear, the blinding pain gone. He felt perfect. Better than perfect. Shigaraki, however, stopped scratching. He tilted his head, his visible eye wide with a hungry, obsessive curiosity. He stared at Izuku, at the faintly glowing horn on his forehead, at the teacher who should have been a broken mess on the floor. What was that? Shigaraki's voice was a hushed, reverent whisper. He wasn't angry. He wasn't frustrated. He was utterly captivated. He took a hesitant step forward, like a scientist discovering a new, impossible life form. That light, that power, he didn't heal him. He undid it. He looked at his own hand, the 5 fingers that brought ruin and decay. Then he looked back at Izuku. It's the opposite. The opposite of me. His fascination was a palpable, chilling thing. It wasn't the fury of a thwarted villain. It was the obsessive desire of a collector who had just found the one piece that would make his collection whole. He saw not an enemy, but a reflection, a perfect, mirrored inversion of his own existence. He who brings everything to dust had just witnessed someone who could turn dust back into flesh. The Nomu, an unthinking engine of destruction, reacted to the nearest threat. It turned its vacant eyes on the small boy who had just undone its work. It reared back, its fists ready to obliterate the new target. Aizawa, his mind clear and body restored, tried to move, to erase the Noma's quirk, but he was still lying on the ground. This is it, Izuku thought, his drained body refusing to move. I saved him, but now it's my turn. Boom! The main doors of the USJ were blown off their hinges, sent flying inward by a force of impossible strength. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, a mountain of muscle and righteous fury. His smile was gone. His face was a mask of pure, undiluted rage. Have no fear! All Might's voice thundered, shaking the very foundations of the dome. Because I am here. He wasn't smiling. And he looked very, very angry.